April 15, 1944, 20,000 feet above the Mediterranean coast of Italy. Lieutenant Marcus "Mad Dog" Davis of the 322nd Fighter Group steadied his P-51 Mustang, his fingers light on the control yoke as he scanned the horizon for German aircraft. The young pilot smiled confidently, certain that today's escort mission would be routine, just another milk run for the increasingly respected Tuskegee Airmen. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Lieutenant Davis could not possibly know was that in the next few hours, his unconventional targeting technique, a shooting routine born in the cotton fields of Alabama, would save not only the bomber formation he was protecting, but would forever change how the military viewed the capabilities of black aviators. First, Lieutenant James Wilson sat in the cramped cockpit of his B-17 Flying Fortress, his palms sweating despite the freezing temperature at altitude. As the bombardier of Sweet Georgia Brown, he had completed 12 missions over Nazi-occupied Europe, but the flak was getting worse each time, and German fighters seemed to be everywhere. The 305th Bomb Group had lost 3 aircraft on yesterday's mission, and Wilson wasn't convinced their escort, the new colored pilots he'd heard about, could provide adequate protection. "How much longer until the target?" Wilson asked over the intercom. 30 minutes to the IP, Captain Reynolds, the pilot, responded. Initial point was the final turn before the bomb run, when the formation would fly straight and level into the teeth of enemy defenses. "I don't like this," said Technical Sergeant Frank Miller, the top turret gunner. "I hear these new escorts lose bombers all the time." "Tuskegee boys," Reynolds said. "Command wouldn't assign them if they couldn't do the job." "Sure about that, Captain?" Miller replied skeptically. "I heard they're just some experiment. They've never seen real action." Wilson frowned. He'd seen the distinctive red-tailed P-51s as they'd rendezvoused with the bomber stream over the Mediterranean. There were perhaps 20 of them, tiny silhouettes weaving protective patterns around the 70 B-17s of the 305th. He wanted to believe Captain Reynolds was right, but doubt gnawed at him. 10,000 feet below and 15 miles ahead, Hauptmann Kurt Müller of Jagdgeschwader 27 received the radio alert that American bombers were inbound. Müller, a veteran with 38 confirmed kills, adjusted his oxygen mask and addressed the 11 Me-109 pilots in his staffel. "Remember the plan," he said in German. "We attack from the front, high to low, then immediately dive away. The Americans have P-51s now, but they are inexperienced pilots. They cannot match our skill." Muller had heard rumors about the Negro pilots flying with the Americans. His intelligence briefing suggested they were undertrained and placed in combat only for propaganda purposes. An easy target in his estimation. "Jawohl, Herr Hauptmann," his pilots responded in unison. Back in the American formation, Lieutenant Marcus Davis performed his pre-combat ritual, something the other pilots in the 382nd had taken to calling his MAD routine, named both for his initials and its seemingly odd nature. First, he rolled his head in 3 precise circles. Then he flexed each finger exactly 5 times. Finally, he whispered his grandmother's words. "See with your spirit, not just your eyes. Red one to all red tails. Bandits approaching 12 o'clock high," came the calm voice of Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the commander of the 322nd Fighter Group. "I count 12 plus. Prepare to engage." Marcus acknowledged the call. As the son of sharecroppers from Tuskegee, Alabama, he had developed his unusual shooting technique hunting rabbits with a slingshot, the only weapon his family could afford. His father had taught him to anticipate movement, to feel the connection between his body, his tool, and his target. Years later, his instructors at the Tuskegee Army Airfield had tried to break him of these habits, insisting he use standard aerial gunnery techniques. But Lieutenant Davis found that when he employed his personal routine, his shooting accuracy improved dramatically. "Red 7, stick with me," Marcus called to his wingman, Lieutenant Calvin Robinson, a former college football player from Detroit. "Right behind you, Mad Dog," Robinson replied. Colonel Davis's voice cut through again. "Remember your training. Protect the bombers at all costs. We are not here for personal glory." Marcus tightened his grip. The 322nd had yet to lose a single bomber under their protection, and they intended to keep it that way, despite what the bomber crews might think of their abilities. At that moment, the German fighters appeared, dropping from the sun in a perfectly coordinated attack. Their angular silhouettes grew rapidly against the blue sky as they bore down on the bomber formation. "Here they come!" Robinson shouted. Marcus began his routine instinctively, head circles, finger flexes, grandmother's words. As the Germans closed to firing range, he sensed rather than saw the lead fighter's trajectory. While other pilots tracked the current position of their targets, Marcus's mad technique involved visualizing where the enemy would be by the time his bullets arrived. The difference was subtle but crucial. Hauptmann Müller led the attack, his Me-109 screaming toward the bomber formation. He had executed this maneuver dozens of times, a high-speed frontal attack to break up the American formation, forcing individual bombers to separate where they could be picked off. What Müller didn't expect was the red-tailed P-51 that suddenly appeared in his path, guns blazing with uncanny accuracy. The first bursts struck his engine cowling, then walked along the fuselage toward the cockpit. Marcus had fired not at where Müller's aircraft was, but where his instincts told him it would be, leading his target by an unusual margin that accounted for the Germans' speed and likely evasive maneuver. The bullets found their mark. Black smoke poured from Müller's engine. The German ace banked away sharply, shocked by the precision of the attack. His aircraft, though damaged, remained flyable, but his confidence was shaken. "Retreat and regroup," he ordered his squadron. "These are not the inexperienced pilots we were told to expect." In the bomber formation, Sergeant Miller witnessed the engagement with disbelief. "Did you see that?" he exclaimed. "That P-51 fired before the German was even in range, but he hit him dead on." The aerial battle intensified as the remaining German fighters pressed their attack. Marcus and his fellow Tuskegee Airmen responded with disciplined precision, their red-tailed Mustangs darting through the bomber formation to intercept threats. Colonel Davis's voice maintained its steadiness. "Stay in pairs. Don't chase them down. Our mission is protection." Over the next 20 minutes, the skies above the Mediterranean became a swirling arena of combat. The German pilots, finding their initial attack thwarted, attempted to isolate individual bombers. Each time they found the red-tailed P-51s waiting for them. Marcus engaged 3 more German fighters, employing his mad routine before each firing pass. His first shots often missed, but by his second burst he had calibrated his unique leading technique to the specific flight patterns of the German pilots. To observers, it appeared as though he was firing at empty sky, only to have enemy aircraft fly directly into his bullet stream. "How are you hitting these guys?" Robinson asked over the radio after Marcus damaged another Me-109. "You're firing before they're even in your sights." "I'm shooting where they're going to be," Marcus replied, "not where they are." By the time the bombers reached their target, an aircraft factory near Toulon, the German defenders had lost 4 aircraft, with 3 more damaged. The remaining 5 Me-109s retreated to regroup, allowing the bomber formation to complete their run unopposed. "Bombs away," Wilson reported as Sweet Georgia Brown shuddered, suddenly lighter without its 600-pound payload. Through his bomb sight, he watched the explosions blossom across the factory complex below. "Good hits across the target." Captain Reynolds's voice came over the intercom. "Nice work, everyone. Now let's get home." As the bomber formation turned northward for the long flight back to their base in Italy, Hauptmann Müller was nursing his damaged aircraft to an emergency field near Marseille. His mind raced with confusion and a reluctant admiration. The intelligence reports had been dangerously wrong. These American Negro pilots weren't just adequate, they were exceptional, especially the one who had fired on him with that impossible accuracy. "Control, this is Gelb Leader," Müller radioed ahead. "We encountered heavy resistance. The Americans have a new targeting technique. We lost 4 aircraft." Back at the Ramitelli airfield in Italy 2 days later, the pilots of the 322nd Fighter Group gathered for debriefing. Colonel Davis stood before the assembled men, his posture rigid, expression serious as always. "Gentlemen, yesterday's mission was a success. All bombers returned safely, and we confirmed 4 enemy aircraft destroyed." He paused, looking directly at Marcus. "Lieutenant Davis, intelligence is particularly interested in your gunnery technique. They've been reviewing gun camera footage. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Throughout his training, instructors had tried to break him of his unusual habits, considering them unprofessional. "Sir, I just do what works for me. Whatever you're doing, it's effective," Colonel Davis replied. "After the briefing, report to Major Henderson for a detailed breakdown of your engagement footage." As the meeting concluded, other pilots surrounded Marcus. They had all noticed his peculiar pre-combat ritual and his tendency to fire at seemingly empty patches of sky. "You've got to teach us that trick, Mad Dog," said Lieutenant Jefferson Carter, a recent arrival from the 2nd Tuskegee class. "It's not really something I can explain," Marcus replied. "My father taught me to hunt this way. You have to feel the target, not just see it." "Feel the target?" Carter laughed. "What does that even mean?" Marcus struggled to articulate what came naturally to him. "When you were a kid, did you ever throw a ball to a running friend? You didn't throw it to where they were, but to where they would be by the time the ball got there, right?" "Sure, but that's just basic physics," Carter said. "But you didn't calculate it. You felt it," Marcus insisted. "My technique is like that, but more precise. I visualize the enemy's most likely path and fire along that trajectory." Robinson shook his head. "That's why we call it the MAD method. Marcus Allen Davis is either a genius or crazy." Later that afternoon, Marcus reported to Major Henderson's office as ordered. Henderson, a white officer who served as the group's intelligence liaison, sat behind a desk covered with photographs and gun camera footage prints. "Lieutenant Davis," Henderson said, not looking up from the images, "your shooting accuracy is 27% higher than the group average. That's remarkable by any standard." "Thank you, sir." Henderson finally looked up. "The unusual thing is, according to the frame-by-frame analysis, you're often firing before the enemy aircraft is in your optimal range. By all conventional wisdom, you should be missing." "I anticipate their movement, sir." Henderson leaned back, studying Marcus carefully. "This isn't something we taught at Tuskegee. Where did you learn it?" Marcus hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal about his background. Most white officers had little interest in the lives of black servicemen before the war. "I grew up hunting for food, sir. We couldn't afford to waste ammunition, so my father taught me to lead targets based on instinct rather than visual alignment. I've adapted those principles to aerial combat." Henderson nodded slowly. "Well, Lieutenant, whatever the origin, it's effective. I'm recommending that you document your method for training purposes." "Document it, sir. Write it down, step by step. If we can teach other pilots this technique, it could save lives and aircraft." The request filled Marcus with both pride and apprehension. His MAD technique was deeply personal, developed through years of necessity and practice. Could it even be taught to others who hadn't shared his experiences? As Marcus left the meeting, he found Colonel Davis waiting in the hallway. "Sir," Marcus said, saluting. Davis returned the salute. "At ease." "Lieutenant, I wanted to speak with you privately. Walk with me." They stepped outside into the Italian sunshine. The airfield was alive with activity as ground crews prepared aircraft for the next day's missions. "Henderson tells me your shooting technique comes from hunting," Davis said. "Yes, sir, my father taught me." "My father taught me many things too," Davis said. The unspoken weight of being Benjamin O. Davis Sr., the first black general in the U.S. Army, hung between them. But the most important was that everything we do reflects not just on us as individuals, but on all Negro servicemen. "I understand that responsibility, sir." Davis stopped walking and turned to face Marcus. "Your technique works. If it can be taught, it could change aerial combat doctrine. But there's politics involved." "Politics, sir? Some in command will resist adopting combat methods developed by a Negro pilot, regardless of effectiveness. Others will try to take credit for your innovation. Are you prepared for that?" Marcus hadn't considered these implications. He'd been focused on survival, on protecting the bombers, on proving the worth of the Tuskegee program. The broader significance of his technique hadn't occurred to him. "What should I do, sir?" "Document your method thoroughly and precisely. Leave no room for misinterpretation. I'll make sure it reaches General Eaker directly." Davis paused. "And, Lieutenant, make sure you name it clearly. History should remember its origins." The next morning, before dawn, Marcus sat at a small desk in his quarters, attempting to translate instinct into instruction. The mad shooting routine, as he titled it, broke down into three distinct components. 1. Mental alignment, the head circles, calibrating one's spatial awareness and eliminating tunnel vision. 2. Physical precision control, the finger flexes, ensuring fine motor control and reducing the risk of overcorrection. 3. Predictive targeting, visualizing the enemy's most probable flight path based on aircraft type, speed, and tactical situation. He worked through the night, filling page after page with diagrams, exercises, and theoretical explanations. By morning, he had produced a 20-page manual that represented the first formal documentation of a targeting technique developed from African-American rural hunting traditions. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean in occupied France, Hauptmann Müller had reached a similar revelation. After landing his damaged aircraft and reviewing the engagement with his surviving pilots, he began developing countermeasures against what German intelligence was now calling the Tuskegee tactic. "They fire not at us, but at where we will be," Müller explained to Oberst Weber, his group commander. "It requires us to be more random in our attack patterns." Weber, a decorated veteran of the Spanish Civil War and the Eastern Front, was skeptical. "You're suggesting that Negro pilots have developed a superior targeting method. That seems unlikely, Hauptmann." "I've seen it firsthand, Herr Oberst. Their lead elements anticipate our maneuvers with unusual accuracy. 4 of my aircraft were lost because of it." Weber studied the combat reports with a frown. "I will forward this to High Command, but I would suggest you focus on more plausible explanations for your losses. Perhaps your pilots simply executed the attack plan poorly." Müller stiffened at the implied criticism. "My men followed orders precisely. These American pilots are simply better than our intelligence suggested." Over the following weeks, Marcus's mad routine began spreading through the 332nd Fighter Group. Initially, many pilots struggled to grasp the concept, particularly the predictive targeting element. It wasn't until Marcus organized practical demonstrations using ground vehicles moving in patterns to simulate aircraft that his fellow airmen began to understand. Lieutenant Robinson was among the first to adopt elements of the technique. "It's like learning to play jazz," he commented after a training session. "You have to feel the rhythm of combat rather than just following the sheet music." On May 5, 1944, the 332nd was assigned to escort bombers targeting oil refineries near Ploesti, Romania, one of the most heavily defended locations in Europe. The mission would be their most challenging yet, with over 100 German fighters expected to oppose them. During the pre-mission briefing, Colonel Davis addressed the assembled pilots. "Intelligence indicates Jagdgeschwader 27 and 53 will be defending the target. They've encountered our group before and may have adapted their tactics. Lieutenant Davis's targeting method has proven effective, and those of you who have mastered it should employ it. Those still learning, stick to your training and support your wingmen." As the pilots dispersed to their aircraft, Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Captain Harold Williams, operations officer for the 99th Fighter Squadron. "Davis, word about your technique has reached 15th Air Force headquarters," Williams said quietly. "General Eaker himself has asked for a demonstration when we return." Marcus's stomach tightened. "A demonstration for the commanding general? If your method works as well today as it has previously, it could become standard training throughout the Air Force." Williams paused. "That would be quite a legacy for a sharecropper's son from Alabama." 3 hours later, the massive formation of B-17s and B-24s crossed into Romanian airspace. The red-tailed P-51s of the 332nd spread out protectively around them. Marcus flew on the left flank, constantly scanning the horizon for threats. "Red tails, bandits approaching from the north. High," Colonel Davis warned over the radio. "Multiple groups. Looks like at least 60 plus." Marcus began his routine immediately. 3 head circles, 5 finger flexes per hand. His grandmother's words whispered into his oxygen mask. His awareness expanded, taking in not just what he could see, but what he could sense. The subtle shifts in cloud patterns that might hide approaching aircraft. The behavior of his fellow pilots adjusting to potential threats. The first wave of German fighters appeared minutes later, Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, descending from 0 feet in a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm the American escorts. Among them was Hauptmann Müller, now recovered and leading a new Staffel. Since their last encounter, he had studied what limited intelligence was available on the red-tailed American fighters and had developed what he believed was an effective counter-strategy. "Remember," he instructed his pilots, "random direction changes every 5 seconds during the approach. Do not fly predictable paths." As the Germans dived toward the bomber formation, Marcus observed their erratic flight paths with growing concern. These weren't the same disciplined attack patterns they had faced previously. The German fighters were deliberately varying their approaches, making their movements harder to predict. "They've adapted," Marcus transmitted to his squadron. "Standard targeting won't work. Follow your instincts, not your eyes." Marcus selected his target, a Focke-Wulf making an approach toward a B-24 on the formation's edge. Despite the Germans' irregular flight path, Marcus sensed an underlying pattern. All aircraft, regardless of their maneuvers, were constrained by physics and aerodynamics. The German pilot might change direction frequently, but each change narrowed his options for the next move. Employing his MAD routine, Marcus visualized not one potential flight path, but 3, assigning probabilities to each. He fired a burst along the most likely trajectory, then immediately adjusted to the second most probable path. His first shots missed as the German pilot executed an unexpected roll, but his second burst caught the Focke-Wulf just as it completed its evasive maneuver. Smoke poured from the German fighter's engine as it peeled away from the bomber formation. "Good shooting, Red 7, Robinson called out. "They're trying to counter our technique," Marcus replied. "Watch for irregular movement patterns." Across the formation, other pilots of the 382nd, who had adopted elements of the MAD routine, were experiencing similar successes, though those still relying on conventional targeting methods struggled against the Germans' new tactics. In his cockpit, Hauptmann Müller recognized the red-tailed P-51 that had damaged his aircraft weeks earlier. Despite his countermeasures, this particular American pilot seemed able to anticipate his movements with unnerving accuracy. It defied explanation. The aerial battle raged for 20 minutes as the bomber formation approached the target area. The Tuskegee Airmen, though outnumbered, maintained a protective screen that prevented the German fighters from disrupting the bombers' approach. In the B-17 Sweet Georgia Brown, Lieutenant Wilson watched the red-tailed fighters with newfound respect. "Those boys can really fly," he commented to Captain Reynolds as a P-51 intercepted a Messerschmitt that had been lining up on their aircraft. "They're keeping the wolves off our backs," Reynolds agreed. "I take back what I said about them being an experiment." As the bombers completed their runs over the Ploesti refineries, the German defenders made a final desperate push to inflict casualties. 12 Focke-Wulf 190s attacked from the rear, while the American formation was most vulnerable, climbing up through the bombers' blind spot. Colonel Davis spotted the threat. "Red tails, we've got bandits at 6 o'clock low, climbing fast. All available fighters intercept." Marcus and Robinson immediately broke away from their position and dived toward the new threat. 4 other P-51s joined them, but they were outnumbered 2-1. "Use the sun," Marcus called to the others. "Come at them with the glare behind us." The 6 Tuskegee pilots positioned themselves between the sun and the approaching Germans, making themselves difficult to see clearly. Then, employing variations of Marcus's technique, they engaged the superior force with coordinated precision. Marcus targeted the lead German fighter, a Focke-Wulf piloted by an experienced ace, judging by his maneuvering. The German saw him coming and executed a series of tight turns designed to shake off pursuit. In this moment, Marcus's MAD routine transcended its original form. Rather than trying to predict a specific flight path, he sensed the German pilot's intentions, not just where he would fly, but why he would choose that path. It was a level of intuitive understanding that went beyond mechanics into the psychology of aerial combat. Marcus fired 3 short bursts, each targeting a different potential location. The third burst struck the Focke-Wulf's wing route, damaging its control surfaces. The German aircraft rolled inverted and began a spinning descent toward the cloud layer below. The remaining German fighters, seeing their leader fall and facing unexpected resistance, broke off their attack. The bombers continued their exit from the target area unmolested. "All Red Tails report," Colonel Davis called as they regrouped. One by one, the pilots of the 382nd checked in. All had survived the engagement, though 3 aircraft had sustained damage. In exchange, they had destroyed 7 German fighters and damaged at least 5 more. "Red 7, that was some shooting," Davis said. "Your technique made the difference today." As the formation turned for home, Lieutenant Wilson keyed his radio to an open channel. "Red Tails, this is Sweet Georgia Brown. On behalf of all the bomber boys, we owe you a drink when we get back. You saved our hides today." It was the first time any bomber crew had openly acknowledged the protection provided by the Tuskegee Airmen. For Marcus and his fellow pilots, it represented a small but significant shift in perception. 3 days later, at Ramitelli Airfield, Marcus stood nervously at attention as General Ira Eaker, commander of Mediterranean Allied Air Forces, observed a demonstration of the mad shooting routine. A dozen high-ranking officers from various Allied Air Forces watched as Marcus explained his technique using diagrams and practical exercises with a modified training aircraft. "The key element, sir," Marcus explained, "is to move beyond visual targeting to predictive targeting based on an intuitive understanding of aircraft behavior and pilot psychology." General Eaker, a pioneer of daylight precision bombing and one of the most respected officers in the Army Air Forces, listened with unusual attentiveness. When the demonstration concluded, he approached Marcus directly. "Lieutenant Davis, I've been flying since 1918 and I've seen all manner of targeting techniques. Yours is unlike any I've encountered." The general studied Marcus thoughtfully. "It seems to rely heavily on individual aptitude and instinct." "To some extent, yes, sir," Marcus admitted, "but the fundamental principles can be taught, even if mastery varies among individuals. Have you considered that your background, the necessity of developing these skills for survival, might have given you an advantage that others lack?" Eaker asked. The question caught Marcus off guard with its insight. "I suppose that's possible, sir. Hunting wasn't a sport for my family, it was necessity." General Eaker nodded. "Necessity is often the mother of innovation, Lieutenant. War is no different." He turned to Colonel Davis. "I want this technique documented fully and distributed to all fighter groups in the theater. Call it the Davis method officially." "Sir," Marcus said, surprised, "your name should be on it, Lieutenant. Innovations in combat deserve proper attribution." Eaker paused. "I understand there may be resistance in some quarters to adopting methods developed by a Negro pilot. Those objections will not reach my desk, I assure you." The general's support was a watershed moment, both for Marcus personally and for the Tuskegee program as a whole. In the weeks that followed, instructors from other fighter groups visited the 322nd to learn the Davis method firsthand. Among them were pilots from British, Free French and other Allied air forces, each eager to incorporate the innovative targeting technique into their combat operations. Not everyone was receptive, however. Major General William Kepner, commanding the 18th Fighter Command in England, dismissed the technique as instinctive shooting dressed up as methodology. Others questioned whether success rates attributed to the method were accurately reported, or merely propaganda, to support the controversial Tuskegee experiment. Colonel Davis defended the innovation vigorously, pointing to combat results as the ultimate validation. Under his leadership, the 322nd continued to compile an impressive record, eventually escorting more than 200 bomber missions without losing a single aircraft to enemy fighters, a record unmatched by any other fighter group. By August 1944, elements of the Davis method had been incorporated into training programs for replacement pilots arriving in the European theater. The full technique, with its mental and physical components, proved difficult for many to master, but even partial implementation improved overall combat effectiveness. For Marcus, the validation of his technique brought a mixture of pride and reflection. During a rare quiet evening at Ramitelli, he wrote to his father, "They're calling it the Davis method now, Pop." General Eaker himself made sure of that. "But we both know it's really the technique you taught me for bringing home rabbits, without wasting precious ammunition." Who would have thought those lessons in the cotton fields would someday help win a war? The other pilots tease me, saying I hunt Messerschmitts the way other folks hunt squirrels. Maybe they're right. On September 18, 1944, the 322nd was assigned to escort bombers targeting aircraft factories near Munich. Intelligence reports indicated heavy opposition, with elements of Jagdgeschwader 27 and 53 expected to defend the target. During the mission briefing, Colonel Davis emphasized the importance of maintaining their perfect record. "Gentlemen, the bomber groups have specifically requested us as escorts. That's a testament to your performance. Keep it that way." As they prepared for takeoff, Marcus learned that one of the bomber groups they would be protecting included the 305th, and among them, the crew of Sweet Georgia Brown. "Looks like we'll be saving your friends again," Robinson joked as they walked to their aircraft. "They're not exactly friends," Marcus replied, "but they're counting on us all the same." The mission proceeded according to plan until the formation approached Munich. As they crossed into heavily defended airspace, German fighters rose to meet them, more than 80 aircraft from multiple Jagdgeschwader. "Redtails, we have company," Colonel Davis warned. "Maintain formation integrity and protect those bombers." Among the German defenders was Hauptmann Möller, now commanding an entire Gruppe. Since his encounters with the red-tailed P-51s, he had become something of an expert on American fighter tactics, particularly those employed by the 322nd Fighter Group. "They will expect us to attack from multiple directions," he briefed his pilots. "Instead, we will concentrate our force on a single point in their escort screen, overwhelm it, break through, then target the bomber formation before they can respond." The German force approached with unexpected discipline, nearly 60 fighters converging on a section of the escort screen, protected by just 12 P-51s, including Marcus and Robinson. "They're concentrating on Sector 3, Colonel Davis observed with concern. "Red 5 through Red 16 hold position. All other fighters converge on Sector 3 to reinforce." The order meant that Marcus and his fellow pilots would be outnumbered nearly 5-1 until reinforcements arrived. It would be the ultimate test of the Davis method. "Formation Delta," Marcus called to the pilots in his immediate vicinity. "Use the predictive targeting principles. Don't chase individual aircraft." As the German fighters closed in, the 12 Tuskegee Airmen arranged themselves in an innovative defensive formation that Marcus had developed as an extension of his targeting technique. Rather than each pilot engaging in individual dogfights, they maintained a loose but coordinated structure that allowed them to support each other while protecting specific sectors of the bomber stream. The first wave of German fighters broke against this defensive screen like water against rocks. Despite their numerical advantage, the Germans found themselves firing at empty air as the P-51s seemed to anticipate their approaches and shift position just enough to avoid their fire while maintaining their protective coverage. Marcus engaged 3 Messerschmitts in rapid succession, employing his full mad routine before each firing pass. 2 of the German aircraft sustained damage significant enough to force them to withdraw, while the third broke off its attack after nearly colliding with a fellow Luftwaffe pilot. In the bomber formation, Lieutenant Wilson watched the unfolding aerial battle with a mixture of awe and anxiety. The red-tailed fighters were grotesquely outnumbered, yet somehow maintaining a protective screen that prevented the German fighters from reaching the vulnerable bombers. "I've never seen anything like it," Wilson commented to Captain Reynolds. "They're flying like they know what the Germans are going to do before they do it." Muller, observing from his command position, recognized the distinctive patterns of the American defense. "It's him," he muttered to himself, spotting a P-51 that moved with particular grace and precision. The same pilot who had damaged his aircraft months earlier was now orchestrating this improbable defense. For nearly 15 minutes, the 12 Tuskegee Airmen held back the German assault, employing variations of the Davis method to maximum effect. They suffered losses. 2 P-51s were shot down, and 3 more sustained damage. But they prevented the Germans from breaking through to the bomber formation. Then, just as fuel and ammunition were running critical, reinforcements arrived. The remaining red-tailed fighters converged on Sector 3, evening the odds and forcing the German fighters to withdraw. "Red tails, form up and resume escort positions," Colonel Davis ordered. Outstanding work, all of you. As the formation reorganized, Marcus checked on his wingman. You still with me, Robinson? Right here, Mad Dog, came the reply. Though I'm down to my last 100 rounds. That was some party. Not over yet, Marcus warned, scanning the skies. They'll try again before we reach the Alps. Indeed. As the bomber formation completed its run over the Munich factories, the German fighters regrouped for a final assault. This time, however, they faced the full strength of the 332nd, now alerted to their tactics. Muller, recognizing that the element of surprise was lost, nonetheless pressed the attack. Target the bombers directly, he instructed his remaining pilots. Ignore the fighters if possible. The German aircraft accelerated toward the bomber formation, attempting to slip through the escort screen. They encountered a defense that seemed to anticipate their every move, with red-tailed P-51s appearing precisely where they were most needed. Marcus, low on ammunition but determined to maintain the 332nd's perfect record, engaged Müller's aircraft directly. The German ace, recognizing his opponent from previous encounters, accepted the challenge. The two pilots engaged in a swirling dogfight that drew them away from the main formation, each testing the other's skill and nerve. Müller was an exceptional pilot with years of combat experience, but he found himself unable to gain an advantage against the American who employed that maddening predictive technique. Every time Müller thought he had established a firing position, the P-51 would shift just enough to deny him a clean shot. "Who are you?" Müller wondered aloud in his cockpit, frustration mounting as his fuel gauge dipped toward reserve levels. In his P-51, Marcus maintained his focus, applying his mad routine with instinctive precision. He was no longer consciously thinking about the technique. It had become an extension of his natural awareness, honed through months of combat and years of necessity before that. The two aircraft circled and dived through the thin air at 25,000 feet, neither able to gain a decisive advantage. Then Müller made a critical error, attempting a split-S maneuver at insufficient altitude. As his aircraft inverted and began its diving turn, Marcus anticipated not just his flight path, but his tactical intention. Instead of following the German fighter down, Marcus cut across the arc of Müller's turn, positioning himself where the Messerschmitt would complete its maneuver. He fired his remaining ammunition in a single, concentrated burst. The bullet struck Müller's aircraft at the precise moment it leveled out from its dive. The German fighter shuddered, black smoke pouring from its engine cowling. Müller, recognizing that his aircraft was mortally wounded, jettisoned his canopy and bailed out over the Austrian countryside. Marcus, now out of ammunition, watched the German pilot's parachute deploy successfully before turning back toward the bomber formation. He arrived to find the last of the German fighters retreating, the bomber formation continuing unmolested toward Allied territory. Red 7 to Red Leader, Marcus reported. Ammunition expended. One enemy aircraft confirmed down. Roger, Red 7, Colonel Davis replied. Rejoin the formation. Mission accomplished. In the B-17 Sweet Georgia Brown, Lieutenant Wilson looked out his window to see a red-tailed P-51 pull alongside. The pilot removed his oxygen mask briefly to reveal a smile, then offered a salute before sliding back into escort position. Wilson returned the salute with genuine respect. "Tell the boys we owe that pilot a case of whiskey," he said to his radioman, "and make sure they know which aircraft it was." The mission to Munich marked a turning point in how the bomber groups viewed the Tuskegee Airmen. What had begun as skepticism had transformed into outright admiration. Bomber crews began specifically requesting the red tails as escorts, confident in their ability to bring them home safely. Back at Ramitelli, Marcus received news that both surprised and humbled him. He had been recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross for his actions over Munich, with supporting statements from bomber crews who had witnessed the engagement. Colonel Davis personally delivered the news. "It's not just for shooting down Müller, though that's certainly part of it," he explained. "It's for developing the targeting method that saved countless lives. The citation specifically mentions the Davis method as a significant contribution to aerial combat doctrine." Marcus struggled to find words. "Sir, I never expected anything like this. I was just trying to survive and do my job." "That's precisely why you deserve it," Davis replied. innovation born of necessity rather than academic theory, the best kind. The recognition extended beyond medals. In October 1944, Marcus was temporarily assigned to the Fighter Training Command in the United States to help incorporate elements of his targeting technique into the curriculum for new pilots. It was an unprecedented appointment for a Negro officer. Before departing Italy, Marcus received an unexpected letter. It had been forwarded through military channels from a prisoner of war camp in England and bore the name Kurt Muller as its sender. The letter, written in careful English, read, "Lieutenant Davis, I have learned your name from fellow prisoners who recognized my description of the pilot who employed the unusual targeting method that led to my capture. If this reaches you, I wish to convey my professional respect for your skill and innovation. In different circumstances, I believe we might have had much to discuss about the art of aerial combat. Perhaps when this terrible war is over, such conversations will be possible. Until then, I remain respectfully, Hauptmann Kurt Müller Jagdgeschwader 27. Marcus read the letter several times, struck by the unexpected connection with the German ace, who had been both his adversary and in some strange way his counterpart. He composed a reply that same evening. Hauptmann Müller, your letter was unexpected but appreciated. The technique you encountered was one I developed from hunting methods taught by my father in rural Alabama. Necessity often drives innovation, as I'm sure you've found in your own experience. I accept your professional respect and return it in kind. You are an exceptional pilot, whose skill forced me to refine my method through our encounters. I share your hope that when this conflict ends, we might find ways to converse as airmen rather than adversaries. Until then, I remain respectfully, 1st Lieutenant Marcus A. Davis, 322nd Fighter Group, CAF. The exchange between adversaries reflected a fundamental truth about the MAD method and its impact. At its core, Marcus's innovation had transcended racial and national boundaries, gaining recognition based solely on its effectiveness in combat. In a war where racial prejudice remained entrenched in military structures, the universal language of survival and combat proficiency had created a space for merit to override bias, if only temporarily. Marcus's temporary assignment to the training command stretched from weeks into months as the value of his expertise became apparent. Working with instructors at various fighter training bases, he helped develop a simplified version of his technique that could be taught to new pilots with diverse backgrounds and experience levels. Not everyone will master the full method, Marcus explained to a group of skeptical training officers at Randolph Field in Texas. But even partial implementation improves survival rates and combat effectiveness. The reception to his presence varied widely. Some bases welcomed him professionally, treating him as a valued combat veteran with important knowledge to share. Others maintained rigid segregation policies that complicated his ability to instruct effectively. Throughout, Marcus maintained the dignified professionalism that Colonel Davis had instilled in all the Tuskegee Airmen, letting results speak for themselves. By early 1945, elements of the Davis method had been incorporated into the standard fighter pilot training curriculum across the Army Air Forces, though often without attribution to its originator. The official training manuals referred to predictive targeting techniques rather than the Davis method, a subtle erasure that reflected the continuing reluctance to acknowledge innovations developed by Negro personnel. Colonel Davis, now commanding all 4 squadrons of the 322nd Fighter Group in Italy, fought this institutional amnesia through official channels, insisting on proper attribution in all combat reports and training documentation that originated under his command. In March 1945, as the war in Europe approached its final phase, Marcus returned to the 382nd to resume combat operations. His reception at Ramitelli was enthusiastic, with pilots both old and new, eager to learn from the originator of the technique that had become central to their tactical approach. "The prodigal son returns," Robinson greeted him with a grin. "They didn't manage to steal all your secrets, did they?" "Only the ones I was willing to share," Marcus replied. The 332nd had changed during his absence. New pilots had arrived, veterans had completed their tours and returned home, and the group had continued to build its reputation as one of the most effective escort units in the theater. Throughout, the MAD routine had remained a defining element of their combat approach, with various pilots adapting and personalizing it to suit their individual styles. On April 26, 1945, just days before the German surrender in Italy, the 322nd flew its final combat mission, an escort for bombers targeting rail yards near Linz, Austria. Marcus led a flight of 4 P-51s, now seasoned by nearly a year of continuous combat. The mission encountered only token resistance, as the Luftwaffe had effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. The few German fighters that rose to challenge them were piloted by inexperienced trainees pressed into service in a desperate last stand. Marcus observed their erratic, panicked movements with a mixture of professional assessment and human compassion. These were boys, not veteran pilots like Müller, thrown into combat with minimal training and no realistic chance of success. When one Messerschmitt approached his section, flown by a pilot whose inexperience was evident in every movement, Marcus employed his targeting technique not to shoot the aircraft down but to disable it non-lethally. A precise burst to the engine cowling caused enough damage to force a landing without endangering the pilot unnecessarily. Red 7, confirm your kill, the squadron leader requested after observing the German fighter's descent. Negative on the kill, Marcus replied. Aircraft disabled. Pilot should survive. It was, perhaps, the most humane application of his technique, using his enhanced predictive ability to minimize harm rather than maximize it. In those final days of the war, with victory assured, such choices became possible. After the German surrender on May 8, 1945, the 322nd remained in Italy for several months as occupation forces. During this period, Marcus received orders to report to Wright Field in Ohio, where the Army Air Forces were consolidating their combat experience into revised doctrine and training materials. Before departing, he visited Colonel Davis one final time. They want me to work with the research division on formalizing the targeting method, Marcus explained. Davis nodded approvingly. Make sure they get it right this time. Full attribution. Yes, sir. Though I'm not sure how much influence I'll have. More than you might think, Lieutenant. Davis handed him a folder. These are copies of every official report mentioning your technique, along with statements from bomber crews who credited your method with saving their aircraft. Take them with you. Evidence speaks louder than prejudice. At Wright Field, Marcus found himself in an unusual position. The technical officers were eager to document his technique, but uncomfortable with the man himself. The contradiction revealed the complex racial politics that continued to shape the military, even after Negro servicemen had proven themselves in combat. Dr. Harold Stanton, a civilian aeronautical psychologist working with the research division, took a particular interest in the psychological aspects of the MAD routine. Your head-rolling ritual, Stanton asked during one session, you describe it as calibrating spatial awareness. Can you elaborate on that sensation? Marcus considered how to express what was largely intuitive. It's like resetting your inner compass. When I complete the circles, I feel more connected to the space around me, more aware of movement in my peripheral vision. Fascinating, Stanton made notes. And the finger exercises? Fine motor control preparation. My father taught me that steady hands make clean kills when hunting. It's about eliminating unnecessary tension before you need precision. And your grandmother's words? What function do they serve? Marcus hesitated. This was the most personal element of his routine, the one he had been reluctant to include in official documentation. My grandmother was born into slavery, he finally said. She believed that people who lived close to death developed extra senses, ways of perceiving danger that others couldn't. See with your spirit. Not just your eyes was her way of telling me to trust those deeper instincts. Stanton looked up from his notes, visibly uncomfortable with the introduction of cultural elements that fell outside his scientific framework. I see. Well, perhaps we could frame that as a focusing mantra of some kind in the official documentation. You can frame it however you want, Doctor. Marcus replied evenly. But if you're going to call it the Davis method, you should include all of it, including its origins. The tension between cultural heritage and institutional assimilation characterized much of Marcus's work at Wright Field. The final document, Predictive Targeting Techniques for Fighter Aircraft, published in October 1945, represented a compromise. While officially acknowledging First Lieutenant Marcus A. Davis as the originator of the method, it presented the technique in clinical, technical language that stripped away much of its cultural context and personal history. By the time the document was published, the Army Air Forces were rapidly demobilizing. The 322nd Fighter Group was deactivated in October 1945, its personnel either discharged or reassigned to other units. The group's exemplary combat record, including their unique distinction of never having lost a bomber to enemy fighters, was already fading from official memory as the military restructured for peacetime. Marcus himself received an honorable discharge in November 1945 and returned to Alabama. Like many veterans, he found the transition to civilian life challenging. The skills that had made him a combat ace had limited application in a segregated South still firmly under Jim Crow laws. He briefly considered applying to flight schools or airlines, but found them closed to Negro pilots regardless of combat experience. Instead, he used the GI Bill to attend Tuskegee Institute, studying mechanical engineering with a focus on aircraft design. During his studies, Marcus maintained correspondence with several key figures from his wartime experience. Colonel Davis, now working within the newly formed United States Air Force to implement integration policies, provided mentorship and occasional assistance in navigating post-war opportunities. More surprisingly, Marcus also exchanged letters with Kurt Müller, who had returned to Germany after his release from the POW camp. The former adversaries developed an unusual friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences of aerial combat. "The skills you developed have applications beyond warfare," Müller wrote in one letter. "The ability to predict movement and understand spatial relationships could benefit civilian aviation, particularly as aircraft speeds increase." The observation resonated with Marcus, who had been exploring ways to apply his unique perceptual abilities to aircraft design and testing. In 1948, he completed his degree and, through a combination of persistence and Colonel Davis's discreet advocacy, secured a position as a test engineer with the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, the predecessor to NASA, at Langley Field in Virginia. At NACA, Marcus encountered a research environment that, while not free from racial prejudice, valued technical ability and innovative thinking. His experience with the MAD routine proved unexpectedly valuable in analyzing pilot response patterns during high-speed maneuvers, particularly as aircraft approached supersonic speeds. In 1949, while reviewing data from early supersonic flight tests, Marcus identified a pattern in pilot reactions that correlated with his combat experiences. Pilots encountering transonic buffeting often overcorrected, exacerbating control problems in ways that resembled inexperienced fighter pilots under combat stress. Drawing on his predictive targeting principles, Marcus developed a training protocol to help test pilots anticipate and compensate for these effects. The approach, initially met with skepticism, gained credibility after successful implementation in the X-1 program. "It's not so different from combat," Marcus explained to a group of test pilots. "You're not reacting to what the aircraft is doing now. You're anticipating what it will do next, based on subtle cues and physical awareness." This application of the Davis method to experimental aircraft testing represented an unexpected evolution of techniques born in the cotton fields of Alabama and refined in the skies over Nazi-occupied Europe. It also marked Marcus's gradual transition from being defined by his wartime achievements to establishing a new identity as a contributor to peacetime aviation advancement. The Korean War, beginning in 1950, brought renewed interest in combat tactics developed during World War II. The Air Force, facing a new generation of jet fighters in combat conditions, revisited effective targeting techniques for high-speed engagements. The Predictive Targeting Techniques Manual was dusted off, revised for jet aircraft, and reintroduced into pilot training. Marcus, now established at NACA, received a letter from the Air Force requesting his consultation on the updated training program. The letter, signed by General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., now the first Negro general in the United States Air Force, represented a formal acknowledgement of his contribution that had been somewhat diluted in the immediate post-war period. "Your method has proven its value across 2 wars and multiple aircraft generations," Davis wrote. "It's time its origins were properly documented and preserved." In the spring of 1951, Marcus took a temporary leave from NACA to work with the Air Training Command. The experience was markedly different from his previous instructional tour. The Air Force, officially integrated since 1949 under President Truman's Executive Order 9981, provided a more receptive environment for his expertise, regardless of his race. Working with training officers at Nellis Air Force Base, Marcus helped adapt his technique for jet combat, where speeds were significantly higher, but the fundamental principles of predictive targeting remained valid. The revised program was implemented for pilots deploying to Korea, where it contributed to the Air Force's air superiority over North Korean and Chinese aircraft. Upon returning to NACA in late 1951, Marcus found that his temporary assignment had raised his professional profile. He was assigned to more significant projects, including early research that would eventually contribute to the Mercury space program. Throughout, he continued to apply and refine the perceptual and predictive principles that had begun as hunting techniques in rural Alabama. In 1954, a documentary filmmaker from CBS contacted Marcus about including his story in a television special about innovative combat techniques developed during World War II. The program, Victory Through Innovation, represented the first major public recognition of his contribution to aerial warfare doctrine. The segment featured interviews with bomber crew members who attributed their survival to the protection provided by the Tuskegee Airmen employing the Davis method. Among them was James Wilson, formerly of Sweet Georgia Brown, who had become a commercial airline pilot after the war. "Those red-tailed angels kept us alive when nobody else could," Wilson told the interviewer. "And it wasn't just courage, though they had plenty of that. It was this uncanny ability to be exactly where they needed to be, exactly when they needed to be there." Later, I learned that was the Davis method at work. The program also included a rare interview with Kurt Muller, who had become a flight instructor for Lufthansa. Speaking through an interpreter, Muller provided a unique perspective as someone who had experienced the technique from the receiving end. "It was unlike anything we had encountered," Muller explained. "Traditional aerial combat relies on seeing and reacting. This approach seemed to anticipate our movements before we made them. It was disconcerting, to say the least." The documentary brought public attention to a story that had been partially obscured by the racial politics of the immediate post-war period. It also connected Marcus with veterans from both sides who had been influenced by his innovation, leading to speaking engagements and reunion events that further cemented his legacy. In 1958, as the space race accelerated following the Soviet launch of Sputnik, Marcus's expertise in predictive movement and spatial awareness drew attention from the newly formed NASA. He was recruited to join the Human Factors team working on astronaut selection and training for Project Mercury, the United States' first human spaceflight program. The assignment represented a profound evolution of skills developed for aerial combat, now being applied to humanity's first ventures beyond Earth's atmosphere. The ability to anticipate and respond to rapidly changing spatial conditions proved valuable in developing protocols for orbital maneuvering and potential emergency responses. During this period, Marcus maintained his connection to the Tuskegee Airmen through regular reunions and veteran events. As the civil rights movement gained momentum throughout the 1950s and 1960s, the Tuskegee Airmen's story became increasingly relevant as an example of excellence overcoming prejudice. Marcus, now in his 40s and established as both a combat innovator and aerospace engineer, found himself increasingly called upon to speak about his experiences. While initially reluctant to step into a public role, he recognized the importance of ensuring that the contributions of the 332nd Fighter Group remained in historical memory. "What we did wasn't just about proving Negro pilots could fly and fight," he explained during a commencement address at Tuskegee Institute in 1962. It was about bringing unique perspectives and experiences to the fight. My targeting method wasn't developed, despite my background, but because of it. Those hunting skills from the Alabama countryside helped defeat the Luftwaffe over Europe. The MAD routine, now officially documented as the Davis method in Air Force training materials, had become a standard element in fighter pilot training across multiple generations of aircraft. Its principles, adapted for increasing speeds and changing technology, remained relevant even as combat aviation evolved from propeller-driven aircraft to supersonic jets. In 1968, shortly before his retirement from NASA, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. The German Luftwaffe, now part of NATO, was hosting an international symposium on aerial combat tactics, and they requested his participation as a featured speaker on predictive targeting techniques. The invitation came through Kurt Müller, now a senior training official in the West German Air Force. Their correspondence, maintained sporadically over the years, had evolved from the respectful exchange of former adversaries to a genuine friendship based on shared passion for aviation. Marcus accepted the invitation with some trepidation. It would be his first return to Europe since the war, and he was uncertain how his reception as both an American and a Negro would unfold in Germany. His concerns proved unfounded. The symposium in Munich treated him as an honored guest and respected expert, whose contributions to aerial combat doctrine transcended national and racial boundaries. His presentation on the origins and evolution of the Davis method received standing ovations from pilots representing air forces throughout NATO. During the symposium, Marcus was reunited with Müller in person for the first time since their aerial duel over Austria in 1945. The two men, now in their 50s and long removed from combat, embraced like old friends who had shared a profound experience that few others could comprehend. "I told you we would have that conversation about aerial combat when the war ended," Müller said with a smile. "It just took a bit longer than expected." The symposium concluded with a ceremonial flight in which Marcus and Müller flew formation in training aircraft over the Bavarian countryside. Once the site of their deadly contests, now the backdrop for a demonstration of reconciliation and shared purpose within the NATO alliance. The event received international media coverage, highlighting both the technical significance of the Davis method and the remarkable personal journey of its creator, from rural Alabama to international recognition. For Marcus, it represented a form of closure to the combat chapter of his life and affirmation of how his innovation had transcended its wartime origins. Following his retirement from NASA in 1969, Marcus devoted more time to documenting the full history of the Tuskegee Airmen and ensuring their place in military aviation history. He collaborated with historians and fellow veterans to preserve not just the operational record of the 382nd Fighter Group, but the personal stories that illustrated their experience as Negro servicemen fighting for a country that still denied them full citizenship. In 1972, Marcus published his memoir, Seeing Beyond from Cotton Fields to Combat Skies, which detailed the development of his targeting technique and its connection to his upbringing in rural Alabama. The book received critical acclaim and helped cement his legacy as both a combat innovator and an important figure in African American military history. During the 1970s and 1980s, as the contributions of the Tuskegee Airmen gained wider recognition, Marcus became an elder statesman for the group. He participated in numerous documentary interviews, museum exhibitions, and educational programs aimed at sharing their story with new generations. When the Air Force Academy introduced a course on the history of aerial combat tactics in 1985, Marcus was invited as a guest lecturer to discuss the development and legacy of the Davis method. Standing before cadets in Colorado Springs, he reflected on the journey from segregated training at Tuskegee to teaching at the nation's premier Air Force institution. What began as a necessity, learning to hunt efficiently with limited resources, became a combat advantage in the skies over Europe, he told the cadets. And what started as a personal technique became doctrine that has saved countless lives across multiple conflicts. Never underestimate the value of diverse experiences and perspectives in solving problems, both in war and peace. The MAD routine, now studied as both historical tactical innovation and practical combat technique, had achieved a permanence in military aviation doctrine that transcended its origins. Elements of predictive targeting and spatial awareness training derived from Marcus's method had been incorporated into pilot training programs worldwide, adapting to changing technology while maintaining the core principles. In 1995, at the age of 74, Marcus attended the opening of the Tuskegee Airman National Historic Site at Moton Field in Alabama. The facility, part of the National Park Service, included a permanent exhibition on the Davis method and its impact on aerial combat tactics. Standing before the display, which featured photographs, diagrams, and video interviews explaining his innovation, Marcus found himself reflecting on the improbable journey from hunting rabbits in poverty to transforming how pilots engaged in aerial combat. A group of Air Force Academy cadets on a historical tour approached him, recognizing him from their tactical studies. "Sir," one young woman asked, "is it true that you developed the method because standard techniques didn't work for you?" Marcus smiled. "It's more accurate to say I already had a method that worked before I learned the standard techniques. My instructors tried to break me of it, but sometimes the unconventional approach proves more effective." "What's the most important element of the technique that's still relevant today?" another cadet asked. "The recognition that combat isn't just mechanical, it's intuitive," Marcus replied. "You don't just see with your eyes, you perceive with your entire consciousness. My grandmother called it seeing with your spirit. The Air Force calls it enhanced spatial awareness. The words change, but the principle remains." As he aged, Marcus took particular satisfaction in seeing his method taught to an integrated Air Force where pilots of all backgrounds learned from his innovation. The technique that had begun as a necessity of poverty and been refined in the crucible of combat had transcended its origins to become part of the common heritage of military aviation. In 2007, Marcus Davis, along with the other surviving Tuskegee Airmen, was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in recognition of their service and sacrifices. During the ceremony in Washington, D.C., special mention was made of his contribution to aerial combat tactics, an acknowledgement that completed the journey of the Davis method from obscurity to official recognition at the highest levels. After the ceremony, a young Air Force pilot approached Marcus with a request for an autograph on his copy of Predictive Targeting Techniques, the latest iteration of the training manual based on Marcus's method. "Sir, we still use your technique in training," the pilot explained. "They call it enhanced predictive targeting now, but the instructors still talk about the Tuskegee Airman who developed it." Marcus signed the manual with hands that had aged, but still maintained the muscle memory of those precise finger exercises before combat. "What's your aircraft?" he asked. "F-22 Raptor, sir," the pilot replied. "The targeting computer incorporates principles based on your method for predictive lock acquisition." The revelation that his technique had been integrated into the most advanced fighter aircraft in history brought a smile to Marcus's face. What had begun with hunting rabbits in Alabama had evolved through propeller fighters, early jets, and now into the digital age of supersonic stealth aircraft. "The basic principle never changes," Marcus told the young pilot. "See not what is, but what will be. Everything else is just technology." Marcus Davis passed away peacefully in 2012 at the age of 91, one of the last surviving members of the original Tuskegee Airmen. His funeral in Tuskegee, Alabama, was attended by Air Force officers of all ranks, veterans from multiple conflicts, and aviation historians who recognized his unique contribution to combat tactics. The Air Force provided a missing man formation of F-16 fighters, one of which peeled away as they passed over the cemetery, a traditional aerial salute for fallen aviators. What made this tribute unique was that all of the pilots performing the ceremony had trained using elements of the Davis method. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. had once told Marcus, "Make sure you name it clearly. History should remember its origins." Through persistence, excellence, and the undeniable effectiveness of his innovation, Marcus had ensured that his contribution would indeed be remembered, not just as a footnote to the Tuskegee Airman story, but as a significant advancement in aerial combat that continued to protect pilots long after its creator had left the skies. Today, Elements of the MAD routine continue to be taught to military pilots worldwide. The technical aspects have been adapted for modern aircraft and enhanced with digital technology, but the core principles remain: the calibration of spatial awareness, the preparation for precise control inputs, and most importantly, the development of predictive targeting based on intuitive understanding of movement and intention. What began as a necessity for a young boy hunting to help feed his family became a combat advantage that saved countless lives, and finally, an enduring legacy that transcended both its humble origins and the racial barriers of its time. Marcus "Mad Dog" Davis transformed aerial combat, not despite his background but because of it, proving that innovation often comes from unexpected sources and that diverse experiences bring unique and valuable perspectives to every field of human endeavor. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.